And here we are, at least according to the screen, it says I'm live. So welcome once again. It is 1 o'clock Eastern time. And I will admit that of all the things I've resolved with respect to the live feeds, I still cannot get the time thing worked out because I have to actually guess what it wants me to say. So I put in 10 a.m. and it goes, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time is. So anyways, here we are. So by the way, I wanted to say that somebody just checked in from the UK, and I appreciate that. Red Renault 21 Turbo. Hello, all. First time that I've managed to get to watch a live feed here in the UK. Thank you for checking in. It's kind of funny because right before the live thing switched, I was looking around the room and I realized that I often refer to things that are off camera. And I if I can't reach them, I say, well, I'll talk about that later. And I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that I did an interview with the BBC. The British Broadcasting Corporation, I believe is what that BBC stands for. And they actually sent a film crew over to America to talk to me about the lemon law. So I actually have a tape of it that they sent me. And the problem is it is an actual videotape. Brastoff, Britain, November 5th, 2004. So yes, 16 years ago, I was on the BBC talking about cars. So I'm going to take this someplace in the near future, and that's one of the reasons I pulled it out. I'm going to take this someplace in the near future and get this digitized and then upload portions of it to my channel. I won't upload the whole thing because, number one, I'm not on the whole thing, but number two, I don't want to run into any copyright issues. So there you go. But like I said, I've been looking at this for the last, year or so. It's been sitting right there. Finally, I've touched it. Now I'll do something with it. So there you go. 2000M CR. I found the $100 bill. It's funny. I have to tell you that I've gotten better now. And by the way, JJ CEO, we'll talk in a second. I'm getting better about the $100 bill, and I don't want to give it away, but this one's pretty obvious. But I've put it a few times on the display behind me, the bookshelves, and I hit record on the camera. And then I shoot the video and I'm editing and I'm like, wait, where's the bill now? And I can't find it, even though I know where it is. So I can tell you that once in a while I do put it in tricky places, but now I almost always try very hard to make sure that I can see it through the viewfinder on the camera. Because like today it's on edge, but I think it's the angle you can see it. I put it a couple of times where I'm like, that wasn't even fair. That wasn't even fair. Although there's the one guy who always finds it no matter what. But JJ CEO 40, Steve, please come to Chattanooga, Tennessee for the Rump Run, Saturday, March 28th, 2020. I wore the shirt one day that was sent to me by these kind people in Chattanooga, and they are trying to raise awareness for colorectal cancer, and they put on a fun run called the Rump Run, which makes it even more fun, and do that to raise awareness, and I'm assuming raise some money for some good causes. And I'm looking into it. The only problem I have is it's quite a distance from me, and I'd like to drive down. And the problem is that the Rump Run is only a 5K. I haven't run a race that short in about 20 years. I ran a 5K. Somebody actually gave me a shirt, said, vote for so-and-so, and asked me if I'd run a race wearing their shirt. And I ran this race, and I got at the end of the race. I wasn't even sweating. And I'm like, so... But I will. I'm looking into it right now. I'm right on the precipice of doing it. So, Toby Kenobi, good afternoon from Virginia Beach. I hear Virginia Beach is a beautiful place. I've never been there. I had a good friend who was a program director at a bunch of radio stations near there. So, of course, it's radio. It has something to do with that. Hello, Steve from Oxford, Alabama. Donald, hey, thanks for checking in, Donald. I see your name cross my line quite a bit. Donald, did not know you were in Oxford, Alabama. I've been to Alabama a few times, but I'm not sure where Oxford is. But, it happens. Veridical Erudition says, hello from Rhode Island. Pronounce Natick as Natick. And that was the question. I had several people tell me that. But the funny thing is, that I looked up Natick, is it Massachusetts, on Wikipedia, and it didn't give a pronunciation for some weird reason. So I was guessing it was Natick, but I mentioned Manor, Texas, Manor, but I pronounced it foolishly, Manor, like everybody else would call it. And I had quite a few people say, Steve, no, it's Manor, Texas. But we have a Charlotte, Michigan, spelled the same as Charlotte, North Carolina, but we call ours Charlotte. Why? No one knows. So, Dr. Jonathan Kramer, mics. Have you used all the mics behind you? No, I have not. In fact, I guess that all of them work. And I toyed with the idea briefly. I've got a friend named Tom who's a real equipment guy with all the audio stuff and recording. He's a musician. And he and I were joking. In fact, he's the one who gave me that ribbon mic right there. We were talking about the possibility of doing some videos and experimenting with the different microphone sounds. And the problem is that the mics all have wacky different connectors. The modern mics like this one use what's called an XLR connector, and it's got 3 prongs on it like this. But those mics all have different connectors. I don't have the adapters for any of them, I don't think. And so it would just be a nightmare of logistics, and I don't think it would be that interesting. I suspect that many of them would sound the same. By the way, I've actually had somebody jokingly say, Steve, whenever you point your hand like this, you hang your pinky out. Is there a meaning behind that? And I'm going to tell you, yes, there is. Because if you look at the pinky on my right hand and the pinky on my left hand, you'll notice that the pinky in my right hand does not fold in properly. And when I was a little kid, again, this is the stuff you learn from watching me on Sundays. I do not do videos about this. When I was a little kid, probably 2 or 3 years old, I've got 5 older brothers. The brother directly above me, his name is Tim, was apparently put in charge of watching me. He was the Steve Wrangler for the day. And apparently I decided I wanted to go outside because I'm that kind of a guy. And so I went towards the door, and Tim was told not to let me go outside due to just the management at the time. And so Tim, and again, the exact details are hazy because I was quite young, as was he. But I suspect there's been a lot of cover-ups going on over the years. But somewhere along the line, I reached for a door frame and tried pulling myself out the door while somebody grabbed me and tried pulling me away from the door and slammed the door and caught my pinky in the door. So my pinky has a scar. You can't see it, but you'll have to trust me. It goes from there to there, and it does not fold in properly. And it's been like that my entire life. Now I'm not claiming I need a handicap placard for this so I can park places. I'm just pointing this out because when I go like this, my natural thing is to leave my pinky hanging. It's just something I've developed over the last 50 some odd years. And yes, I blame my brother. Okay. And like I said, it might go all the way to the top. It might be my parents' fault. So there you go. Betty Anderson is Michigan #1 in potholes. Yes. Case closed. Michigan has got the worst roads possibly in the world, but certainly in America. I heard a very good comedian say that the potholes are there so that blind drivers know when they've left Ohio, because then they can feel it. But I'm going to do a video shortly. Somebody has proposed as a solution to our potholes, turning them into toll roads. I kid you not. Our politicians here are worse than our potholes, if that makes sense. Yeah, Ninok Farmer says, Ninok Frampini says that this could be a gang sign. And that also is possible. So there you go. Chris in North Dakota, what's the story of the $100 bill? There's a video up. Just search Leto and $100 bill. But I posted some videos about the fact that there's sovereign citizens who say that you don't need a driver's license because the Supreme Court said so. And I've said, if you can show me the case that says from the Supreme Court that you don't need a driver's license, that $100 bill is yours. And it's been here ever since. So it'll be mine forever, but I can't really take it off the set because it is a promise I made. So there you go. Duncan Campbell checking in from Melbourne, Australia. Thanks for checking in. And there's nothing more Australian sounding than the name Duncan Campbell. I'm not sure why that is, but there's something very unique about a lot of Australian names that it's a slight, it doesn't sound British. It sounds Australian. Duncan Campbell, like I said. There you go. Ronald Knight checking in from San Antonio. Never been there either, but I've heard it's very, very nice. I've driven through Texas, just the top part, driving across the country. But no. Rick Bugger, hey, Steve, I noticed a naval flag on your bookshelf and would like to ask if you have also been in the Navy. No, I have not. I've not been in the military. The flag with the gold fringe on it is often called an Admiralty flag, but it's actually simply a ceremonial display flag. And if you look, most buildings that have flags mounted indoors that are not mounted to a wall will have a gold fringe around them. So the one in the Oval Office in the White House, gold fringe. Courtrooms, if they're hanging, gold fringe. So that's all that means. But I salute anybody who's done a service to our country in the armed forces. I did this story the other day about TCF Bank here in Michigan, who refused to let the guy deposit the check that he'd gotten from a discrimination lawsuit because it looks like they did that because they're discriminating against him, which was ironic. And he mentioned that he had been in the military, honorably discharged, and he said that to a reporter. And I had several people say, Steve, why did you repeat that? Because that does not mean he's trustworthy. It doesn't mean he's not lying. It does, they didn't know that. And my point with repeating that is simply that if I meet somebody and I have nothing else to go on, and they say, oh, by the way, I served in the Air Force for 4 years, honorably discharged, I immediately know something about them that I didn't know before. And it's the fact that they did that shows a bunch of things about them. The fact that you go in and you spend the time in there and you're honorably discharged, it means that you are a hard worker. You can follow instructions. You've got to have some standards and some ethics. And I'm not saying that it is a universality that everybody who spent time in the military is all like godlike. But the fact that he said that did mean something to me. And I think to most people who said, the guy served our country. Yeah, that's great. But he's also the kind of guy who must, by surviving 4 years in the Air Force, he's probably not the kind of guy who's all kooky and nutty and is going to go in and start screaming and yelling at people behind the counter at a bank, which, by the way, he did not do. He did not do that. And so I took that to mean that in my mind, he has more credibility. So if you don't think so, great, that's you. But for me, it did. So there you go. Wayne Yaffe, hello from Denver, Colorado. The audio sounds great. Hard to beat the RE20. Thank you for noticing. This is an Electro Voice RE20. It's pretty much the standard broadcast mic in America. And I love this microphone. It's a little expensive. I know guys who do podcasting or want to get into podcasting and say, Steve, do I need one of those mics? And I say, well, you can podcast with a less expensive microphone. I did for years using a thing called a Blue Nessie, which is a decent mic, about $100. This one's about $400, I think. But this one is one I used in radio. I like the way it looks. I like the way it sounds, and it serves my purposes very, very well. So I like the fact that you caught that. If you see the logo of my show, which is back here somewhere, I think, at least it was. I'm not even sure what happened to it. By the way, I have a new Calumet Copper Kings logo behind me as well for my friends up north in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But the logo for my channel, the Leto's Law logo, actually has a blue and white rendition of the top part of this microphone. And it's also similar to a Finnish flag, which we did on purpose. And I got to give a shout out to my friend Jane Chaika. Jane Chaika is the one who did that for me. I asked her to do me a logo, and she said, what would you like it to look like? And I said, I don't know, you incorporate some elements from my show, things I talk about a lot, things about me, I don't know, microphones, Finland, whatever. And she came back with the logo that I now use. I like that. Paul Ryder says the green car is a Tucker, and that is correct. And occasionally we have to do this for the new viewers who don't know. But up here is a Chrysler Turbine car, circa 1963. Then next to that is Bobby Isaac's Charger Daytona, 1969, but he raced it primarily in 1970. This would be a Tucker 48, often mistakenly called a Tucker Torpedo, but it was called the 48. And this right here is a Ferrari Gto that a friend sent in after I mentioned the fact that the guy across the street from him, as growing up in Birmingham, had one in his garage. Very, very cool car, V12 engine, hand-hammered aluminum body. Fabulous car. Some people would argue that that is the most beautiful car ever built and sold to the public. And I would not say they are wrong. I certainly think that they're certainly in the ballpark. If you said name the most beautiful cars ever made, the Ferrari Gto is often going to be on the short list. So, and then of course over here is the bank. That is the tail end of the Titanic slipping below the shelf. It's not perfectly accurate with respect to dimensions and the number of screws and so on, but it's an homage. And then of course over here is my deuce and a half at a different scale, but that's an M35, and that one is got a gun on the roof to simulate, one that's actually used in service, probably in the Vietnam era. My M35 that I had back in the day did not have a gun on the roof, so for obvious reasons. There you go. Dr. V, turbine cars are quite interesting. Very different design. Yeah, and interesting thing about the turbine cars, Chrysler built turbine cars from 1953 through 1983 and didn't end the program until 1988. And they put turbine engines in a bunch of different cars that were standard production cars. But when it came time to put the fleet of them on the road in 1963, they had those cars designed by Elwood Engel, and he had them built at Ghia in Italy. And those bodies were all basically all handmade. They built 55 of them. And so they put a, funky engine in this special built car. And so the whole project was just kind of a really, really neat thing they did. But they actually did continue developing the turbines into the 1980s, which many people don't realize how long they went with that. Dan O'Neill calls out that the 6x6, the M35 has got 3 driving axles, the front axle, and then there's 2 back axles. And the interesting thing about that is at least mine had an air-powered disconnect. So you could, if you wanted to, disconnect the drive train to the front axle, like at highway speeds, for instance. And then you just simply have the back 2 axles driving the vehicle. But if you took it off road, you engage that front axle. You could also put it in low range because the transmission had a low and a high range. And the first gear was a creeper. So if you engage the front axle, put it in low range, put it in creeper, the truck would idle at about a half a mile an hour. You could walk along next to it, and it would run over anything, and it would pull stumps. So there you go. But by the way, sorry. Lawrence Taylor. Hey, Steve, your favorite North Dakotan checking in. Hey, if South Dakota is embracing its crystal meth problems, what's North Dakota doing? Anybody? Pro Builder, hello from northern Connecticut. Thank you. Thanks for checking in. Robert Bettina says, now everything is gone with a darn CVT, the constant velocity transmission. Yeah, just one big torque converter. And I actually did a rant in a recent video, it hasn't gone up yet, about modern cars versus, it's in a different context, but it came up about how in the old days, water pumps, you knew where they were and you knew how to fix them. Now they're electronic. Water pumps shouldn't be electronic. That's stupid. But somebody asked about whether we call the creeper a granny gear. I've heard that as well. That's another nickname for it. Somebody says, Ghost Shadow, problem with the turbine cars is the exhaust and the turbines don't like dirt. 2 points. One is the exhaust was hot, but it was no hotter than the tailpipe emissions of any other car from the era. If you look at a turbine car, I'm not sure if this will have it, but we'll see. Yes, they do. Beautiful. This turbine car is anatomically correct. But the turbine is up here, right? In fact, I believe, come on, baby. Come on, there we go. Okay, so there's a turbine engine in there, right? See that turbine engine? How do we get that? There we go. Okay, so the turbine exhaust comes out, and you'll notice how wide these exhaust are, okay? And it comes back here, and there's very, very large exhaust tips. But you'll notice how wide these become. And they purposely have this extremely long, wide exhaust system that by the time the tailpipe emissions come out, it's well cooled off. You can put your hand in it. I've done it before. I've stood behind a running turbine on 3 different occasions and put my hand underneath it and felt it. Okay. So it won't hurt you. It won't burn the pavement. It won't burn the grass. They're fine. So that's not a problem at all. But with respect to them not liking dirt is also a true point. And I can't really get the shot here, but this whole assembly here is the air cleaner. And underneath the hood of a turbine car, turbines eat a lot of air. The amount of air going into a turbine is huge. And it's all going in and being compressed and burned and all that. And the problem is that as the turbine parts are spinning, if anything got in there, foreign material, large pieces of dirt, rocks, coins, anything like that, it could damage the turbine blades. So to make sure that never happens, these things have got these gigantic air cleaners. And what's interesting about it, if you pop the cover off that big air cleaner assembly, there's actually 2 air cleaners in there. And there's actually 2 intakes. And what they did is they discovered that turbine engines, if you want to quiet them down, some of the turbine engines, if you were near an airplane, for instance, a lot of the noise of a turbine engine is coming from the front, from the air going in, just as much as the exhaust going out. So to quiet the turbine engines down, they took the intakes and they faced them at each other and put these huge air cleaners right here and then put the covering over it. And so when the thing is idling, it's extremely quiet, but it's moving a ton of air through that assembly. But it's a very, very convoluted thing. But yeah, it's because they don't like dirt. They do not like foreign material. So there you go. BK Greg asks, did you get the 1916 Great Lakes Tour Guide I sent you? And absolutely I did. It's one of the things that I forgot to mention at the top of the show. And Keith, who's in Ohio, by the way, wrote me a very nice letter, longtime viewer of your podcast, and just simply mentioned that he had found this book. And this is the kind of thing, I love this kind of stuff. So this book is entitled Summer Tours 1916, okay? And it's put out by a cruise line. And as you go through, it describes cruises and tours you can do back in 1916. Now, of course, we can't go back and do these things now, but it's fascinating to look at all these different cruises, the best way to travel to Toronto, how to see Niagara Falls. And they have photographs of a lot of these destinations, also like the hotels. You want to go to the Hotel Pontchartrain in Detroit. The Hotel Pontchartrain combines more up-to-date features than any other hotel in the country. Appeals particularly to tourists and travelers. Streetcars from every steamboat dock and a railroad station stop in front of the Woodward Avenue entrance. One entire floor is devoted to convention hall and banquet room facilities conducted on European plan. Unsurpassed cuisine, excellent service, and the rates start at $1.50 a day. So I could, this thing, I've had this in my living room since I got it about a week ago, literally, and it's on the coffee table. And every now and then I pick it up and flip through it and read the ads, read the articles. I love that stuff. And I know there's people out there who aren't as into the history or the old books, or the old pictures. I watch a lot of these shows on the Discovery Channel about like gold mining, for instance. I was watching the most recent one about Dave Turin's attempts to find old gold mines. And one of the things I like about the shows is they'll show photographs of, like, here's a mine from 1890 and the hole in the ground, right? But the photographs fascinate me because you can see what the people look like, what they're wearing, what the tools look like, what the equipment looks like. I find all that fascinating. I don't know why. I absolutely am amazed by it. So there you go. Ghost Shadow. Yes. Large, wide exhaust to dissipate heat. Friends are turbine mechanics, also in military. Leak and filter system and turbine-powered tanks eats engines fairly quickly. Yeah, and that's one thing that I know you know this, okay? I'm not talking to you, Ghost Shadow. I'm talking to everybody else. First time I've said that sentence in my life, is that U.S. Army tanks, the actual tanks used by the U.S. Army, okay? The M1, right? It's the greatest Army tank ever made. There is no question that it is head and shoulders above anything out there. And it's so far ahead that if you look historically back and say, how did anybody rank against their contemporaries? It's still the best tank ever made. It's turbine powered. It's run by a jet engine. And so it's kind of unusual to think that they're using a turbine engine in an Army tank, but that's what they're doing. And interestingly enough, the turbine technology that started in Chrysler in the 1950s, and they actually started working on them after the close of World War II, so in the late 1940s, they started developing automotive turbines. And somewhere along the line, some people from that program left and went and started a company in Michigan called Williams Research, and then Williams International. Williams International is still in existence. But a bunch of these people, both from the Chrysler Automotive Group doing turbines and from Williams, later went to work at General Dynamics, which is the company that was making the tank military turbines. And so all of this stuff ties together. And so it's interesting because one of the guys I interviewed for my book on the turbine car program was called out of retirement by some friends of his who said, hey, we've got a problem over here, and we think you're the guy who can fix it for us. I'm not going to get into the story. It's kind of complicated. But there was a moment in time when they were considering killing that aspect of the program and making the M1 powered by just a regular piston engine. And they brought this guy in to answer a question for them, and he answered it in such a way they said, you know something? You're right, we're going to go to turbine engines. And guess what? They've been extremely successful. Now, I understand that they do eat a lot of fuel, and their maintenance is trickier. And I've actually seen footage of them removing the engine of one of these tanks, I think during Desert Storm, out in a desert. And the idea about working on in essence, a jet engine out in the desert where you're trying to keep things clean from debris and sand, that's an extremely important, difficult thing to do, but it works. So I've seen a lot of documentaries about those tanks, how well they do, and the people who've been in them and crewed them in battle, and everything about them, not just the drivetrain, but the weapons systems they've got on them. I know a lot of people aren't that interested in military stuff, but for instance, the M1 tank can be cruising along at full speed, which is actually very fast, and it can lock its gun on a target. And I've seen a demonstration of this. And so it's locked its gun on a target while the tank is going over uneven ground. And the whole time the tank is going over uneven ground, the gun stays locked on the target, meaning that they've got this thing rigged in such a way that the suspension of the tank will guarantee that the gun stays on target despite what's happening to the chassis underneath it. And the technology that goes into that is amazing. And trust me, if you're out on the plains of Megiddo and you got tanks at both sides running towards each other at full speed, you want to be the one who's in the tank that can do that and not the other guy, because the other guys are the ones who don't get any shots off before they go meet their maker. So enough of that. Too much military stuff here. Carl Childers points out the M1 can use the same fuel as a helicopter supporting it or the other vehicles in the area of operations. Yeah, and Carl, I should point that out. The M35 Deuce-and-a-half Army truck is also multi-fuel. And one of the things that our planners did after World War II, started thinking about future wars, is they said, you know something, it doesn't make sense that you have, aviation fuel and truck fuel and Army tank fuel and Jeep fuel. Why not run all of these things on the same fuel? It's going to take some work, but once we get this all worked out, then you just have multi-fuel vehicles and then basically one supply of fuel. And so we did that, and it makes a difference. It really does make a difference. So the idea that you can run out of fuel, stick anything in there, it'll work for the most part. So Matt D, good afternoon, Steve. And to you, my friend. Hey, Carl, by the way, I'm not really sure why people insist on jumping into these live chats and saying stupid stuff. They do, but I try to block them and shut them down if I can. So there you go. Stephen B, driving behind an M1 is like tailgating an industrial hairdryer. It's gotta be. SD Super. Hi, saw you live. Just wanted to say awesome videos. Love your views and explanations of things in a very fascinating and non-boring way. Thank you very much, my friend. I appreciate that. Joe G, the old 2.5-ton trucks where multi-fuel engines could run on diesel or Mogas. Yeah. The M35 I had, I ran on diesel all the time because I could get it, but I knew it could also run on other stuff. So there you go. What is the delay between what we say? I don't know. It sounds like a bad bumper sticker. Tim Sullivan, any updates on the Ford Fix video? Yeah, Tim, I've got a video going up tomorrow that'll answer the question. I don't want to ruin it, but I got contacted by 2 different people who convinced me that they have very good connections. And they got me not just the document I already had, but they got me the internal translation, if you know what I mean. So we know what it is. But, well, like I said, I have a video going up tomorrow. Space Raptor, Williams made small jet engines to fit in cruise missiles. Yes, they did. Williams, anytime you see a cruise missile on the news, and quite often they're going and they're not coming back. But both the ones that are launched from submarines, like the Tomahawks, or the ones that are airdropped, the cruise missiles, they have different nicknames for them, but they're all basically the same idea. It's a subsonic guided missile that's using GPS. It can fly very, very low to the ground. They're extremely hard to shut down. And as a result of that, they're very, very useful. They got a very, very long range. And they're powered by a turbine engine that has blades about yay big in it. And it's an interesting project if you think about it, because the turbine's only got to survive an hour, hour and a half. Because like I said, it ain't coming back. And so they make those. They also make turbine engines for like auxiliary power units, like helicopters and so on. And they've done a bunch of other smaller projects. And then they also do make larger engines for things like Cessna Citations and so on. But it's a very interesting company. Sam Williams, the guy it's named after, Dr. Williams, got his start at Chrysler. He was the guy who said, I bet we can shoehorn a jet engine into one of these cars. And somebody said, knock yourself out, do it. And so he got a team of guys together, and they started downsizing a turbine engine to where they could, stick it in the car and make it work. So there you go. Bill McDonald, are paper law books better than electronic? I actually like flipping through the paper law books from time to time because it's easier to go, oh, what section? Oh, like jump here, jump there. But anytime I'm going to read a law on a video or on a live feed, I print out the electronic version so I have the most recent version. Laws can be updated from time to time. I'm familiar with most of the major updates to the laws I work with, but with my luck, I'm going to be looking at something that changed yesterday. So just to be on the safe side, I do always print out a hard copy, but I get it offline. The law books behind me are outdated. They're actually a couple of years old. But I've said it before, I saved them because I like the color blue. And I had a set that were green. I didn't like that color as much. And so I don't actually use them as often. I generally look at the other ones online. So there you go. Christopher McCann, what started your interest in turbine engines specifically? You talk about them more than any other mechanical part. That's primarily because I find them fascinating. Now that I've written a book and people know so little about them, but I grew up in Detroit. That car came out in 1963, but I remember seeing them as a child and hearing about them and always wondering whatever happened to them. Chrysler built 55 of them, and then 3 years later they destroyed 46 of them. And it's a long story about why they did that, but it's such a bizarre program that Chrysler actually did that and spent, I don't know how many millions of dollars building those cars, and then winds up destroying them all, which is another story. But now Jay Leno's got one. Yeah, Chrysler still has 2 of them, and I've actually gotten a chance to drive 2 of them, so it's very, very cool. But yeah, I talk about those a lot. I talk about the wing cars a lot too. I love those, and also the Tuckers. I'm hoping to have some more videos shortly about some Tuckers. A good friend of mine who owns Nostalgic Motoring also works on and helps people restore their Tuckers. And this guy's a walking encyclopedia of Tucker knowledge. And so he currently owns 1 Tucker, but he has a couple others he's working on. So one of these days I hope to shoot some video of some Tuckers and just come out here and just talk about nothing but Tuckers. So there you go. Carl Childers, I wish they would have caught on, referring to the turbine cars, and have them available for purchase today. They are very reliable and quite fuel efficient. Yeah, one of the cool things about them is that the turbine engine's got fewer moving parts, and the parts that do move spin, they don't reciprocate. And so there's less vibration and less wear and tear on things. And so they have a lot of advantages. Obviously, they're very, very technologically advanced. They're very expensive to design, probably expensive to build in the first place. But, if they had caught on, it would have been interesting. I don't think they ever will, but I do think that if they wanted to, they could have gone with some kind of hybrid with a turbine and a generator and then make the car electric. And that would have been a perfect marriage of those two things. Emmanuel Guerra says Gilmore and Henry Ford have Tuckers. Yes, they do. And up until recently, the Gilmore and the Henry Ford also had turbine cars, because the Gilmore had the turbine car from the Detroit Historical Museum on loan to them, but I think they don't have it anymore. But the Gilmore Museum is in Hickory Corners, Michigan. It's not far from, say, Kalamazoo, Battle Creek, that area, someplace over here. And if you ever drive through that part of the state, it absolutely is worth it. What happened was there's a guy named Gilmore, a very, very well-known car guy. Guys my age remember A.J. Foyt, the race car driver, often drove a vehicle that had the word Gilmore in the title. Be like the Foyt Coyote Gilmore, something like that. And Gilmore was one of the guys who financed A.J. Foyt's racing career. But also, Gilmore started collecting cars, and he had a farm with some big barns on it out near Hickory Corners, Michigan, which is about as big of a town as you think it is. And it's an intersection, Hickory Corners. I'm not making it up. There's a couple buildings there, and that's it. Maybe a couple hickory trees. And when he passed away, he basically left his car collection and his property, and he endowed it in such a way that it became a museum. And now it's got a whole bunch of buildings. They've got some, they've saved a bunch of buildings. They brought out of the location things that look like car dealerships and railroad depots, things like that. And every year they hold 3 or 4 major car events there, like the Mopars at the Red Barn. And the Red Barn is a reference to one of the buildings on the property. And if you've gone onto my channel and looked, I did a video where I walked around the car owned by Ramo Stott, the Ramo Stott Superbird. It's owned by a friend of mine named Doug Skellinger. And Doug Skellinger brought that car to the Mopars at the Red Barn 3-4 years ago. And so I was at that car show, but I've been to the museum, and it's one of those museums you could literally spend more than a day at, because you couldn't see it all without rushing through it in a day. It's that big. And it's reasonably priced to get in. You'll do some walking because the buildings are scattered about the grounds of this big farm. But it's interesting in that, you do a lot of walking at any museum. The Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, you do a lot of walking also, just all indoors, So get a nice summer day, drive to Hickory Corners, go to the Gilmore. Just trust me on this one. You will love the place. And they do have a Tucker there. They have a Tucker on display with a bunch of Tucker stuff. Like they have Tucker engine on display. They've got some body panels. They've got, I believe, maybe a gas pump or some other Tucker branded stuff. And they've got a whole corner of one barn dedicated to Tucker, and there is a Tucker there. So it's a very, very cool Tucker. I've stood next to it and looked around at it with permission of the people who caretake there. So it was very, very neat. I've been to that museum 5-6 times. And every time I go there, I'm like, I keep forgetting how much cool stuff they have here. So JC Regal, still no comment on the Ketlin Alex shooting. Is that too hot to comment? I have to apologize. You've mentioned it before, and I forgot which one that is. So the only thing that I consider too hot politically is political stuff. I have people ask me, hey, Steve, Trump or Hillary? And that's the last time you hear me say that phrase. Ninok Frampini, my first car was a 69 Plymouth Fury with a 383. My first real car was a 69 Dodge Charger with a 383. So we have a lot in common in that respect. My 383 came with a 2-barrel, which I very quickly swapped out for a 4 and just watched the fuel economy go down the drain. So there you go. 5153 Flash. I've worked on a rotary boat engine before, and they are strange. That's one of the things I've never understood. Now, I understand what a rotary engine is. And for those of you who don't know, think of a World War I airplane where the pistons, the jugs that contain the pistons, all come off of a central shaft and go around in a circle. So an 8-cylinder rotary has got 8 of these jugs, and then the drive shaft, crankshaft comes out the middle. And I understand how they work. I just don't understand why they'd make them like it. It just seems very, very complicated. But they use those type of engines in all kinds of things, like army tanks. And there's on Dixie Highway, right off of I-75, if you're familiar with Michigan at all, there's a big sign with a picture of a rendition of Jesus, the white guy. And it says, "Are you on the right road?" Well, if you get off of 75 at Dixie Highway and go up about a mile on the left-hand side, there's a guy who has a workshop, and I think he is a gunsmith. And parked out front are 2 military vehicles. One is a Duck, the 2.5-ton amphibious boat car, and that's tucked into the side, and those aren't that rare. But over on the other side in the front, and it's kind of obscured because there's stuff piled around it, is a World War II Alligator. It's an armored amphibious landing craft, and it's cool. I stopped by there one time and had a long discussion with the guy about it because I'm like, I've never seen, what is this? And he's describing to me, and I believe that it's got a rotary engine in it. So among other crazy things, but that one he's got doesn't move, hasn't moved in a long time. And he told me that once in a while people come by and ask him about it. He said a few people say, "Hey, can we put it in a museum?" But of course, no one's ever come by and said, "Hey, I'll buy it from you. Here's a bunch of money." And I think that's part of the bargain you make when you park something cool in front of your business. People look, but once in a while they stop and they ask stupid questions. Stuart Thompson, I think radial engines are always an odd set of cylinders per group or bank. To get an even number, you have to stack up 2 odd groups. You are correct, and I apologize. And for instance, I can tell you that the B-17 bomber, I believe, has 4 large engines, a 4-engine bomber, and I believe those are rotaries, and I believe they might have 2 rows. I could be wrong on that. I know that they put out a monstrous amount of horsepower. SJIM, what is up with Dixie Highway? I've seen that in Dayton, Ohio. Dixie Highway is, I think it's M24 up here, but Dixie Highway is the name of a road long before the interstates that ran from Michigan down through Ohio, and I think it goes all the way down to either Florida or someplace down there, more or less, but it might change names along the way, but it's one of the earliest major roads that connected a bunch of states, and portions of it in Michigan parallel or run kind of parallel to I-75. But there you go. Burke Uper, also north of 75, there was the old Whoopie Bowl. That was fantastic until the kids took it over. I drove by there about a week ago, and the Whoopie Bowl, Whoopee, Whoopie Bowl. The Whoopie Bowl at one point was a flea market / junk shop, but it was an old bowling alley. That's why it's called Whoopie Bowl. Now, I don't know why they call it Whoopie, but that's where the word bowl came from. And by the way, this does, I'm sure, predate Whoopi Goldberg. And there's a big, big building. And I remember coming up there when I was in high school and walking among the rows of eclectic stuff you could purchase. Some people would say junk, but the Whoopie Bowl, it's still there. The building's there, but it's been closed for a long, long time. So there you go. Downhill for life. Sorry I'm late, Steve. Checking in from Killington, where I've been snowboarding. There you go. The Linux Cats, you keep saying rotary engine. I think you mean radial engine. You are correct. I misspoke. Radial engine. Rotary would be the wankle that has an armature inside of a weird crank / housing. And radial engine are the ones that, and of course the word comes because they're all around the radius of the, I would assume the radius of the crankshafts. There you go. Jameson Suter says Dixie Highway is originally US 25. That very well could be. And again, I'm not 100% certain on all of these things. I can tell you that if you look at old maps, especially if you go back far enough, some of the roads and trails are so painfully obvious that it's funny. So I-94 goes from Detroit to Chicago, But if you find maps of Michigan from, say, 1835, you'll see that there was a trail from Detroit to Chicago. And it actually predates Europeans because there were Native Americans here who would occasionally travel back and forth from, in essence, Lake Erie to the bottom of Lake Michigan. And so they traveled back and forth. So there's a trail there. Likewise, there's a trail from Detroit up to Pontiac and up to Saginaw. They call it the Saginaw Trail. And then, of course, that follows roughly what is now Woodward Avenue for a big chunk of it, then Dixie Highway. There's a road in Michigan called Grand River. And if you look at a map of Detroit, Detroit's got 3 or 4 of these spokes coming off of it like this. And it's like Gratiot, Grand River or whatever, Woodward Avenue. And the spokes are the roads, but those roads actually roughly parallel the old walking trails. And so the walking trails became the horse trails, became the wagon trails, eventually became roads, then became paved roads. And then, the interstates came in and kind of worked around all of that. So it's always interesting to see how these things evolved. And, I've spoken to people who used to go to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan before the Mackinac Bridge was there, and you could take a ferry across, you could drive around Lake Michigan. But I also know people who used to drive to Traverse City before I-75 was there, and so it's just, some of this is ancient history and some of it's just history. So there you go. Sid Barrett checking in from Louisiana. Better late than never, my friend. You are correct. David Mitchell, did you make up your mind how the software updated fix will solve the coolant problem? Regarding Ford, yes, someone asked me this earlier. I actually got a definitive answer from somebody who has good information, shall we say. And I have a video going up tomorrow about that, so you'll have to wait till tomorrow. Jari Markkanen, hello from Finland. Hey, thanks for checking in, Jari. And I can actually say your name correct because I believe it's Markkanen. And I'm pleasantly surprised how many Finns are checking into my show because my family name is Finnish. So I know many people who spot that go, oh, he's a fellow Finn, which is cool. And I've been exchanging emails with some of these Finns because, for instance, there's a Finnish singer named Lauri Taka. And I really, really like Lauri Taka. And his music's not available in the U.S., and so I contacted a friend of mine. My friend said, oh, here's a place that'll mail order you the stuff and they'll ship it to you. And so I've been buying CDs from a record store in Finland. And I recently ran into a problem because I found a song of his on YouTube that I liked, but I could not find which CD it was on. And when I was going into the website for the one store I bought CDs from, it didn't explain it carefully enough. So I actually had to ask a friend of mine in Finland, can you go to this website and find out which CD is I need to order. And so they did that for me. So I appreciate that. But it's kind of funny because Finland is such a strange language. And by the way, Finns are proud of this. Finland is such a strange language that if you take blocks of Finnish language and stick them into Google Translate, the stuff that comes out the other side looks like English, but barely. And it's funny because I was looking for music by Lauri Taka and I found a review written in a Finnish newspaper about one of his concerts. And so I thought, oh, this will be interesting. So I took a block of the text and I had it translated and it came out like gibberish. I mean, I could kind of see what they're trying to say. It was not good. I mean, they said the concert was good, but I'm just saying the translation was horrible. So there you go. Chris Hill says the mic is outputting a lot of static. I don't know if that's true or not. Nothing's changed. So there you go. What about bloody Highway 27 in Florida? Are we discussing traffic accidents? Are we talking about US 27? Yeah, JB Weld says the U.S. interstate system was built and funded for the rapid movement of ICBMs and military equipment. Its civilian use is strategically incidental. That's absolutely true. Eisenhower was primarily one of the people behind the interstate system. And basically, there was a time when they said, if we had all our military stuff over here and we got attacked on the West Coast, how do we get it all over there? Or from here to there. And so somebody said, well, why don't we just run a bunch of, and so that's where a lot of the interstate highways came from. And obviously, I mean, it does have a big benefit. Can't imagine driving to California from Michigan. There's no interstates. I mean, it could be done, but it would be scenic, there you go. Let's see, what else you got here? Huh. Robert Bettina on the TV. I barely hear it, but headphone users will be crying. And then, of course, Pro Builder, no static here, as long as I keep my cell phone away from my computer speakers. No static at all, FM. I've not touched anything. There is only two connections to think of here. One is the connection into the back of the RE20, and then one is the cable that goes into the camera. But I shot a video this morning using the setup, haven't touched it since, and got no static at all. So I don't know what to tell you there. Bob Lob Law, blah, 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 points out the Autobahn in Germany. Yeah, and the Autobahn in Germany was an experiment that predated our interstate highway, but I think inspired it. Because prior to World War II, the Germans laid out the Autobahns. And again, they said, well, we're doing this because we're trying to make it so people can drive around Germany, especially at high speeds in those beautiful German cars. But also, they recognized that they needed to get all their army tanks over to the eastern side for some reason or another, or to the western side for some reason or another, or both at the same time for some idiotic reason. We could do that with having good systems going back and forth. So there you go. The Linux, are you doing any audio processing? Static is in sync with your voice, none when you are not talking. No, literally. The microphone goes straight into the camera. Camera goes straight into the, it goes straight to the web presenter. I use a Blackmagic web presenter. So there you go. Robert Hodgins says, using headphones, no static. I wonder if you're using AKG K240s. Those are my favorite headphones. Fred Corrado Jr., have you ever bracket raced or flown RC airplanes? I've never done either, sadly. Never did bracket racing, never did any racing at a drag strip. I may have been in cars that accelerated suddenly when I was on Woodward Avenue as a teenager. But unfortunately, under Michigan law, drag racing is considered a misdemeanor. And so I could never have partaken in anything like that as a young man. So Sam's Electronics says you sound good. So somebody says, hey, JB Wells says, oil the microphone. Yeah, I got to check this thing. Maybe the mic oil is low. Chris Chaos says you're 5x5 on my Bluetooth. And 5x5, of course, is the old radio guy slang for loud and clear. Loud being on a scale of 1 to 5, you're as loud as you can get. 5, 1 to 5 on clear. It's about as clear as you can get. So there you go. Robert Bettina, I've successfully killed 2 drones within days of getting them. Thankfully, cheap ones. That's the question. I'm this close to getting a drone. I've got a bunch of cameras. I've got a bunch of video cameras. I got all kinds of stuff. And I'd like to get a drone. And I've seen some drones up close. I've seen footage shot on drones by people I know. And I'm like, I also know guys who've lost drones. And it would bum me out to put all that money into a drone, fly it off the edge of Brockway Mountain Drive outside of Copper Harbor, and have it go pew, down into the woods. Not that would happen, but you never know. There you go. Analog Designer, Steve, I'll email you about my attempt to purchase a turbine engine Joe Granatelli had used in the 1968 Indy 500. The gas tank in my 1923 Ford T-Bucket wasn't large enough. Jay, I'd be interested in hearing that. One of the other funnier aspects of the turbine technology in that era was that for 2 years, he entered a turbine-powered car at Indy because Indy had no rules against it. And the car was extremely fast, and it sounded funny. And both years, I believe it ran into technical trouble that had nothing to do with the engine. And after the second year, the people who ran Indy said, you know something? We don't want this turning into a racing situation that's radically different from piston engines. So we're going to go ahead and say that, they've got to have piston engines in them. So they went there. So, yeah. John Robinson, put a GPS tracker on your drone. Yeah, the problem with that, it's kind of like when your kite gets stuck in a tree and you throw your frisbee up to get it out and the frisbee gets stuck. And then you take your hockey stick and you throw your hockey stick up and it gets stuck. I'm worried that if I put a GPS tracker on my drone, I'd lose them both. So, uh, JB Weld, what's the Michigan law regarding drones over private property? Can you shoot a drone down circling your house? You know, it's interesting because they've had a bunch of stuff recently. I talked about this recently too, about drones. And by the way, some of the dumbest comments I ever got were in response to my drone videos. But I mentioned that, in fact, there's a live feed. I mentioned that, you know, your property lines aren't just in the ground; they go up into the air. And I had some people go, "No, that's not true. You don't own the space." And it's like, well, then how do you build a house on it? Your house is in 3 dimensions. You must own 3 dimensions. Okay. But there are some rules regarding flying things within a certain altitude. And I personally think that this is an area where the law is still so gray that I'm just telling you right now that if there's a drone hovering around and I get hit with a baseball bat, I would. And I take it to court and go, hey, if I can hit with a baseball bat, it shouldn't have been there. So Tim Sullivan, can you use your metal detector to find your drone? Yeah, I still got to get close enough to find it, though. So, bad drivers of North Texas, do you have a lift in your garage? No, I don't, but I don't have a cool car right now. I've got no reason to get underneath my cars at that level. I'm thinking, I've mentioned before, and I'll only mention it once, I'm thinking about buying a Viper this summer. If I buy a Viper, I might get a lift, but I'm not sure if I plan on doing any work on it myself. I might just buy it and just, you know, have professionals work on it, but we'll see. Now it's moving fast. If a drone crashes on your property, what are your rights? That's a good question. Because if the drone crashes on your property, what are the rights of the person who crashed it? Because for them to come onto your property to recover it, they'd be trespassing. So that's one of those interesting questions. So if the drone crashes on your property, I think I'd pick it up and bring it inside and wait for the owner to show up and explain to me why it was there. So that's what I would do. Anthony Roloffs, you should buy the 2020 Mustang GT 500. I hope that's not the SUV Mustang, but the question I have is, I've never been that big of a Mustang guy. I like Mustangs. I mean, as far as classic American cars go, I like Mustangs. I love the Shelby Mustangs. There were a couple bad years there in the 70s, but I'm talking about just Mustangs in general. I love the early Shelby Mustangs, and even some of the later Mustangs. More recent years, I like them too, but I don't like them enough to buy one. So, but I do respect them. ZUCC, do you think spicy snake flu in China will kill us or not? You know, the thing about the flu that comes around every single year, okay? You got SARS, you got West Nile virus, you got Asian flu, you got chicken flu, bird flu, swine flu, whatever these different sicknesses are. The news treats them the way your local weathercaster treats the threat of snow, okay? We're all going to die in a snowpocalypse tomorrow, and you get 1 inch. Up, we live. And so we've heard of these insane warnings about how bad each year it's going to be. And I don't know if you remember swine flu or not. You got to be about my age to remember swine flu, but there was a time when they were, pressing all Americans to get swine flu inoculations because the swine flu was going to kill us all. And that one kind of fizzled out also. But I'm not belittling how serious these things are. And it sounds like there's a massive problem in China. I've been reading about this in the international news about how many people over there are sick and whether or not the government's reacting properly to it or not. But then the question is, will it get over here and how bad will it spread over here? I don't know. But I'm always a little skeptical because of the fact that they overreact on the flu warnings the same way they overreact on the snowstorm warnings here in the Midwest. So, Wild Bill 57 owned a 1979 Mustang turbocharged from the factory. Was that the SVO? And he says he rolled it. Rolling a Mustang, that takes some effort. Now, I've had physicists tell me that you can roll almost any physical object, okay? You could take an M1 Army tank and somehow roll it. Yes, you could. But generally speaking, when you're driving a vehicle, you are trying not to roll it. So if you are at the wheel of a vehicle, such as a Viper or an M1 or a Mustang, trying not to roll it, and it still rolls, I would I would suggest that at that point, you might want to, and I suspect you may have thought of this already, as the car is rolling over, you might want to, in your mind, say, where did it all go wrong? As you are upside down in your Mustang, and you're hoping it rolls over and lands wheel side down. You just ask yourself, where did it all go wrong? So there you go. Oh boy. Mike D, I like your shirt and appreciate your honesty. Yeah, I sue people for fun. This is actually a joke. I said this in response to some guy who threatened to sue me. And he actually said, don't make me call an attorney. And I'm like, I am an attorney. I sue people for fun. So had it made. Oh boy. Hit an embankment while turning, and then it turned over and rolled into the river. Wait, dude, you buried the lead. You rolled it into a river? The fact that you were typing about it, I assume means it happened, it ended with on a high note, okay? But still, that is a horrible way to end a Mustang. Grant Rennie, hello from Scotland. And hello to you, my friend, from southeastern Michigan, US of A. My soon-to-be ex-wife rolled a Saturn. Somehow it doesn't surprise me. I test drove a Saturn once, and I'd foolishly believed the hype to the point where I actually went to a dealership and test drove a Saturn. I can tell you exactly where I was. I was driving east on Maple Road in Troy, east of Coolidge, but before Crooks, driving eastbound. And I turned to the salesman and I go, are they all like this? And he goes, yeah. Because the thing rattled like a shopping cart filled with plastic toys. Just and that's what I said. I said, are they all like this? And he goes, yeah. It's true that General Motors had a decent idea. Let's start a new car company. Their advertisement said, it's not this year's version of last year's anything. That's a great line. And then you get in it. I mean, they got me into the dealership. I sat in one and drove it. And I'm like, why is it so noisy? Here we are in the 1990s at that time, and there's 100 years of automotive assembly technology, and they can't make a car that doesn't rattle like it's falling apart, brand new, going down Maple Road, Troy. The guy goes, they're all like this. Yeah. I mean, he completely understood it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested. He's saying, okay. Maybe that's why Saturn's, salesmen were so low pressure. They didn't pressure you because they knew that it wouldn't help. So there you go. Saturn 3-door. Why? Yeah. The whole idea about calling something a third door or a 3-door, if it's not a door that hinges like this and you climb in, did they have 3 doors? They actually had an extra thing back there also? Never mind. I'm thinking of something else. Let's see what else we got here. Saturn is a great idea, but poorly implemented. Carl. No, that's my point. My point is that America was clamoring for something else. And something else couldn't be what GM was making. So GM said, okay, let's start our own car company. We're actually going to put it in Tennessee so it won't be under the influence of Detroit. We'll do everything different. They had all these supposed different management techniques and assembly techniques, and the employees were treated differently, and the cars came out and they're still junk. So, Bob Summers, wings or nachos? Nachos. Dude, chicken wings were not intended to be eaten by humans. What happened was the idea that chicken wings exist as a foodstuff in America is one of the biggest hoaxes ever perpetrated in the American public. Somebody someplace was making chickens, right? They were chickens. They start out over here as a cute, fluffy little bird, and they wind up over here in a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? Somewhere in the middle, somebody has to dismantle the chicken into its component parts. Somebody was chopping the wings off and throwing them away as God intended. And somebody said, well, there actually theoretically is meat on this, right? Theoretically. So they if you go to Kentucky Fried Chicken and don't specify, you go like, I want 12 pieces of chicken. There's gonna be a couple wings in there. And each of them's got like a postage stamp of meat on it, right? So most places where you go and if you can specify, you don't order wings. Why would you order the smallest, dumbest part of the bird with no meat on it? So somebody said, well, because no one else wants these things, we can get them really, really cheap. So bars, knowing that guys drink too much and get hungry, bars can sell wings to drunk guys who are hungry late at night when there's nothing else. So you're sitting at a bar in Buffalo, apparently, and you're going, I'm kind of hungry, but I'm drunk. And the bartender goes, hey, we got these things called buffalo wings. Haha, get it? It's a joke. Buffalo wings. And so they order the wings, and each wing's got, like I said, about a postage stamp of meat on it, but they charge you for it as if it's real. And it's messy. It's gross. And by the time you're done, you're going, I should have eaten real food. So those are my thoughts on chicken wings. Thank you for asking. Timothy Marceau points out that wings blow and we should go all breast meat. When I go to Kentucky Fried Chicken, which is not that often, I will admit, I often go in and say, that's all I want. I want the breast meat and that's it. Because that's where the quality meat is, right? It ain't on the wing. I got news for you. Chickens can't fly. And the reason is because their wings suck. So I'm done. I'm done. Patriot Lightning. Steve, I've been in the towing business for 30 years. I've worked rolled overs with Corvettes, Mustangs, and Camaros. Even saw a Pontiac Bonneville station wagon flipped one time. Okay, you've been towing for 30 years. I was going to say it has to be a long period of time because in the time I towed, and I drove a tow truck for about 2 or 3 years, not a high volume job where I was, I only had one car rolled over. And I told the story before in my Fun with Tow Trucks or more tow truck true stories or something like that video, that it was a VW Rabbit and the guy flipped it on dry pavement, level ground, and I believe he fell asleep at the wheel, woke up, jerked the wheel wrong way, hit a curb, jerked it the other way, and at that point, it went like that. And when I found it, it was wheels up, and that was a nightmare because I didn't know what I was doing. I managed to flip it over and get it back to the station, but it wasn't pretty. So, like I said, anything can flip physically. It's a question of how much effort you got to put into it there. So, S. Jim says, you've never been around chickens. They do fly. How far and how high? Do they migrate? Do they fly to Florida? As God has my witness, I thought turkeys could fly. So. Sir Dialot says the breast is the main muscle that birds use to fly. There you go. That explains it. Jerry C. points out, I swear I thought turkeys could fly. As God is my witness. Scott Summers says either boneless wings or just legs, thighs, and breasts. That's the whole point. Boneless wings. At that point, they put too much work into it. I don't know why. JB Weld says, chickens can't sustain flight. That's the point. Remember, the idea of flight is that you can get into the air and stay there, okay? If your trajectory is always this and you always crash, okay, you're not flying, okay? Ask a pilot. It's controlled landings and it's being able to stay up a little bit and decide where you're going to land. So there you go. Turkeys can fly too. Domestic birds have more trouble with it. It's an interesting question. I've mentioned before, where I live, there's a dirt road about a half a mile from me. And when I go running or biking, I often go down the road, I hang a right, I go down and I hit the dirt and I run or bike on the dirt. It's about a mile and a half. And all last summer, there was a family of turkeys and I'd see them like every other day. And it was, I believe, a mom and a dad and 4 youngsters, but there's 6 turkeys. And I got pictures of them a couple times. But it's kind of funny because there's a stretch of road that went up a hill. And there's actually like an almost old farmhouse over here. And they'd either be at the top of the hill behind the farmhouse or at the bottom of the hill, there's a little wooded area. And I remember a couple of times I'm running along and I see the two, and I'm like, where are the other four? And boom, they're back in the bushes or whatever. But the six of them are always together. I don't know how long turkey children stay with their parents. I don't know. High school graduation, maybe. But I'm looking forward to this upcoming spring and summer to see if, in fact, there are any more turkey families in the area. So there you go. Ghost Shadow, wild turkeys can fly, but how far? Can they actually sustain flight? I actually like birds quite a bit, and I spend a lot of time watching birds and looking for birds. And so, for instance, I can tell you that Sandhill Cranes, I see quite a few of them also every year. And in fact, quite late in the year, I think in November or December, I saw a group of Sandhill Cranes flying very, very low over a farm field about a mile from me. And I think I counted 11, but they were Sandhill Cranes. They were flying presumably south for the winter. And Sandhill Cranes make a really, really strange mechanical, like squawking sound that they make. It's very, very distinctive. And so I've actually been out running or biking, and I hear what I recognize to be the sound of a Sandhill Crane. And I look, and sure enough, out in the field is some bird this tall, and, off the ground, it's like 4 feet, just standing out there, kind of walking, looking around. Sandhill Cranes are very, very cool birds. But I see Sandhill Cranes, I see herons, I see egrets, red-tailed hawks. When I'm up north, I see eagles quite a bit. But I've actually seen an eagle 10 miles from my house over near the reservoir where I run my canoe around a little bit. So, by the way, we're over 400 on the feed. Thank you very much. I always like to see that number jump 400. So, Jameson Suter says a wild turkey sustained flight long enough to hit my semi-truck's windshield. Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that because it sparked a memory. I was driving on the road, not 10, but I think it's 131 that goes up towards Cadillac, going to visit my brother. And I saw a truck coming the other direction, a big old semi-truck at full speed. And I saw a turkey come out of the woods and actually elevate as he's trying to get across the road to just the height of the windshield. And poof. And it was like a cross between a fireworks display and the end screen of Defender. One person in the audience, maybe two, will know what I'm talking about. And that bird disintegrated into a puff of feathers as if people were having a pillow fight on the hood of that truck. And I don't know if it took the windshield out, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did. But I actually, remember looking in my rearview mirror because I was going the other direction, and I saw the guy hit his brakes and go to pull over, and trust me, the turkey didn't survive. But I also, like I said, he got about, how high is the windshield of the truck off the ground? 8 feet, 7 feet. So that turkey's flight ended quite dramatically and tragically for the turkey. But again, there you go. Robert Bettina, do you remember Defender? The up, down lever and the reverse button. Thrust, fire. I see. No. Hang on. Thrust, fire. Oh, and the smart bombs, and then hyperspace. So there you go. I am. Chris Nemec also says I never really liked Defender. What? Oh, the Baiters. Yeah, of course the Baiters got you. It's because you took too long to clear the screen. I am this close to buying a Defender machine, people. An upright Defender. I found a guy who sells them. Oh, there was a Defender and Bad Axe at the local arcade. I knew the owner of the arcade. I'd go in there once a day and play Defender. I could play 1/4 all day long. I had to walk away from the game. And I found a dealer here in Michigan that actually has an upright Defender in mint condition, totally refurbished, rehab, everything. And the only problem with them is that they don't have a pause button. And I'd hate to be having fun with it, have the phone ring or something. And it's like, but also I'm not sure if I can justify the expenditure of spending that much money on a toy. But if I get one, you'll be the first to know. So there you go. Kiki Lang, I can see bald eagles out my windows. Where? Where do you live? It's interesting. There are places in America now where bald eagles are becoming much, much more common. Back in the 70s, they were fairly rare in the lower 48. On my canoe trip 2 years ago, I launched out of Duluth and was hugging the shoreline just east of Duluth Harbor into Wisconsin. And I saw trees filled with eagles, bald eagles, 10, 20, 30, I don't know, just sitting up there, hanging out, drinking their coffee, waiting for the morning fish to show up. So Brian Smith, Joust. Yeah, Joust is the same company. Williams made it. Joust is the one that had you flapping the wings of the little ostriches trying to grab the eggs. I never got good at that one, but it was good enough to tempt me. There's also Missile Command, one of the big roller ball in the middle. I knew guys who could play Missile Command all day long on one quarter. Just, oh. It's a strange skill to be jealous of, but I am. Scott Summers, there's a comic book shop in Alpena that opened an arcade. Really? Yeah, there's actually a few arcades that have opened up. There's also one in Detroit that opened up. And we also say, let's see here. Grendel, 81, just saw a bald eagle about 40 minutes ago in Seattle. We also have bald eagles in Wedowee, Alabama. Okay, yeah, and I'm so, Kiki Lang says she or he, Kiki, sorry. Kiki Lang says the St. Lawrence River. And that's one thing, them eagles love their water. Paul Ryder, I worked at Aladdin's Castle in Okemos during college. Yeah, I think Aladdin's Castle was much like Mickey Rat's in Ann Arbor. There was I don't remember what street it was on. I had friends in Ann Arbor in 1981, 82, 83. And there was a street level entrance. You went up some stairs, and it was one of those upper floor things. And it was just rooms filled with video games. And this is the age of, asteroids and Stargate, Star Castle, and then pinball machines. And I remember going in the places just rocking, and then going back later and it's gone. So it was a moment in time. Pac-Man, miss Pac-Man. JP, I have 6 pinball machines at my house. Very cool. And the neat thing about pinball machines, it depends on which era they're from. When I was growing up, a kid down the street from me had a pinball machine, probably from the 60s, in his basement. And his mom would sit down there when she got bored and play pinball. I remember going by the house and hearing the pinball machine in the basement, like, is that your mom? Playing pinball. There you go. Wild Bill, 57, a friend had a Missile Command in his basement with a pinball machine. Yeah, there you go. Donald Norby loved Joust. Yeah, Star Castle with that low bassy rumble. Robert Bettina, you are absolutely correct. And the other thing about Star Castle was it wasn't a glitch, but it was designed this way. There are these rings you're trying to shoot holes in to try to hit this target in the middle. And it would shoot back at you. And to get it to not shoot at you, you could go around the outside, but then it was kind of hard to swing. But you could also fly off the screen this way, and you'd re-enter this way. And so all you'd do is you'd fly off and shoot here, and fly off and shoot here. And once you figured that out, it became really easy. But, remember Galaga? Burke Uper worked the Aladdin's Castle over by Oakland University back in the late 1980s. Where was that? I went to Oakland U. I graduated from Oakland U in 1989. Aladdin's Castle. Rochester, maybe? Grant Rennie. Lots of eagles here in Scotland. Usually you notice them when you hear seagulls going crazy and chasing them. Yeah, it's funny because you'll see that, and that, of course, is one of the reasons they talk about a pecking order. You'll see like a blue jay being harassed by some sparrows. And then, of course, you'll see a crow being harassed by some blue jays. And then, of course, you see the red-tailed hawk being harassed by the crows. And then, of course, you'll see the eagle being harassed by the red-tailed hawk. So that's how it goes. The bigger airplanes can fly presumably further and higher, but the little airplanes can fly faster and harass them. So that's the whole food chain pecking order of nature with birds that I myself have in fact observed. Jim Adams, would anyone pay a quarter to play a video game in a bar anymore? Probably, but the real question is, many of the video games started going up more in price. I remember having to put more than one quarter in. Mark K, Tempest. I played Tempest last year in Traverse City. Traverse City's got an arcade. They did not have a Defender, but they had a Tempest. And the Tempest is the one where all you're doing is you're spinning a dial and pressing a fire button, and you're shooting down a three-dimensional, I don't know what you call it. They had this whole story about how supposedly there's a prison of these things trying to get out, but you're just killing stuff. And it was fun for about 10 minutes. So, Robert Bettina, Jim Adams, it's all swipe your card to play out Dave and Buster's and the like. Yeah, that's the thing. You know, I remember going into an arcade and standing in line to play a machine, and you'd put your quarter on the machine to indicate that you were next. And somebody actually come by and go, whose quarter is that? So that's, you'd put your quarter next to their quarter. See the priority of the quarters. Steve Rasmussen, did you catch the Italian Hall disaster episode of the Stuff You Missed in History Class podcast? Yes, I did. In fact, I even corresponded with them because they mentioned me and my work in the podcast, which I appreciate that they did that. They also said that if you look at the show notes, you can see information about my book, but I couldn't find their show notes. So I have no idea what was happening there. Bill Uper says this is at Meadowbrook Mall on Walton, east of Squirrel. I know exactly what you're talking about. There you go. So Walton Boulevard, east of Squirrel. Yeah. Okay. The interesting thing is that at the time I was a commuter. I did not live on campus at Oakland U. So I would drive back and forth. And so once in a while, I'd be talking to people in class who were people who lived on campus. And they'd say, oh, we're all going over here to do long. And there's a whole community of things around the campus I didn't really know about simply because I didn't spend time there. I hate to admit this, but I would come to school, go to class, and go home. Did all my homework at home. Occasionally go to the library, but not much. So I didn't know about all the hip things that the kids were doing. So... Audit Everywhere. I collect video game systems. I have from ColecoVision to the newest Xbox and PlayStation, except I don't play any of them. I even have a full Mario mascot costume. There you go. Robert Bettina, is Squirrel a town or a street? Either way, weird. Now, Squirrel's a road, and it's just Squirrel Road. And it's interesting because if you drive up out of Detroit, there's Woodward Avenue. And Woodward Avenue goes up to Pontiac. And then kind of east of that is a town called Auburn Hills. And that's where Oakland University is. And Oakland University has been there for a long time, but most people now know of Auburn Hills as the headquarters for Fiat Chrysler. That's where the Chrysler World headquarters are. A big, big building just west of Oakland University. And the road that runs right between Oakland University and the Fiat Chrysler test track, for instance, is Squirrel Road. And so if you get on Squirrel Road, right there at the school or next to FCA and drive south, it'll run you through Auburn Hills, Bloomfield Hills, and then it'll run into Birmingham, which is the town that I grew up in. And it's just a neat little 2-lane blacktop road. I used to do a lot of biking and running on it because there's not a lot of traffic, but nice pavement, and it's very, very well shaded. And when you're running in the summertime, especially, you look for shaded areas. So when I ran the Free Press Marathon the first few times, many of the miles I ran were up and down Squirrel Road. Not quite to Oakland University, but close. Scott Summers, Woodward Avenue, or Woodward and Michigan Avenue. Well, Michigan Avenue is further south. So Jeffrey Tinkle says, always found the word squirrel a strange one, much like sneeze. You know, a lot of words look and sound funny if you spend too much time thinking about them. Squirrel. Squirrel's a weird word because it doesn't sound, squirrel, like it sounds like it could just be SQIRL, like whirl, squirrel. So it looks like we do kind of blend it together. I do like squirrel though, like, or squirrely, like as an adjective. I mean, you can squirrel something away as a verb. Of course, a squirrel's a little fluffy animal. It's a noun. And then squirrely would be an adjective. So it's a fun word to say. So there you go. Jim Adams, like Donkey Kong. Anyone ever heard of that? Of course. See, you have to remember that as the games progressed, you started with, like, say, Asteroids, and then you went to Defender, and then you went to, like, the Ms. Pac-Mans, and then Donkey Kong. And Donkey Kong or Frogger, a friend of mine's got a Frogger machine. Donkey Kong was a weird one because, number one, nobody understood why it's called Donkey Kong. Makes no sense at all. But number two, it was one of those games that you had to memorize a bunch of different steps and moves and stuff. Because that was the problem with a game like Asteroids or a game like Defender. If you got good at it, you could put a quarter in the machine and play forever. And the arcade operator doesn't want you playing forever. They want you to put your quarter in and lose, so you can put another quarter in and lose, and the other guy puts his quarter in and loses. Or Space Invaders, very, very early game, right? So they tried to come up with games that you could not play forever, or if you could, it took you so long to get that skill set and that learning curve that you'd spend $50 in quarters just to learn. I remember a guy in Bad Axe who had memorized all the patterns for Pac-Man. And he'd walk in, he'd put a quarter in, go first screen, second screen, and he'd memorize it. I forgot how many screens you have to memorize. But once you memorized all the screens, he could do it almost without even watching. Just go right, go left, go right, go left, up, down, And I didn't understand that, because the whole point behind Defender, for those of you who don't know, is that Defender, you're in a little spaceship and you're protecting a planet from invaders, okay? And you're flying along in 2 dimensions, but you're flying along and you're shooting the bad guys and you're picking up the good guys. And at the end of every 4 screens, it starts over again, but there's a point where it speeds up and then it stays at that pace. But because all this stuff's coming at you in different directions, the screens aren't the same. It's not like you can memorize it. You had to develop the skill of flying this spacecraft. Not that skill would translate into anything else, but that's why I liked Defender and didn't really care so much for Pac-Man or Donkey Kong or any of those things. There you go. Robert Bettina had the Pac-Man pattern book. See, and somebody had to go ruin the fun by actually printing it up and selling it and going, here's how you can win at Pac-Man. Spend $15 on a book to save a quarter. Mike Gertz, Cubert, that was an interesting one. We were hopping around. There's also Quicks, which is the one where you're drawing the lines. It's almost like a spirograph where you could die. There were a bunch of really oddball ones in the middle there, but some of them, had cult followings, but not so much that they were, that they caught on. Oh, Mark, Centipede, Millipede. Centipede is another one. Millipede was the one they tried to step it up a notch. They also had a Defender 2, which sucked. So Centipede 2 is no good either, but Millipede. But Centipede is the one where there's that weird thing coming down and you shoot at them. And when you shoot at them, it forms mushrooms. But then when the thing's going down next time, every time it hits a mushroom, it comes down faster. So you're trying to clear the mushrooms out while you're shooting the centipedes. So if I could own 3 arcade games, I would own Defender, Centipede, and Asteroids. Those are the 3 I would own if I were to own 3 games. I doubt I will ever own 3. I might own 1, but I'll never own 3. Michael Clark mentions Tron. And Tron, by the way, is the one they tried to do the movie tie-in, and the movie didn't quite work, and then the game didn't quite work. Donald Norby, I'm watching Meekum auctioning a 69 Dodge Daytona. What color is it? Meekum, of course, is the one that sold the brown Daytona, owned by Tim Wellborn, that sold for $1 million with the buyer's premiums and everything added in. So there you go. Jim Adams, wasn't there a Seinfeld episode about buying a Frogger game? Yes, there was. George wanted to buy the Frogger from the pizza place because he had the high score on it, and they had to bring in an electrician so it wouldn't lose power while they brought it out of the store. And then, of course, as they're bringing it out of the store, they had to get it across the road, and then from the aerial view, as George is bringing this thing through the road, it took on the ironic image of being a Frogger machine trying to play Frogger with itself. So there you go. The game where you drive the cart into the truck while it's driving for upgrades was great. Not so sure about that one. Jameson Suter, no missile command. That'd be a toss-up. The problem with missile command is I never mastered it. It frustrated me. Asteroids, I got into, even though it's kind of silly. Yeah, Tempest was unique. That's the one, like I said, where you're spinning the dial, just shooting down those spikes. Space Wars. Michael, I actually looked that up. He goes, I liked the game called Space Wars, which had an asteroids-like graphics, but you fought another ship flown by a second player. Space Wars was one of the earliest video games. It was very, very cool because it had a bunch of really strange options you could play with it. I only saw it one time at a bowling alley that had video games on Woodward Avenue near 14 Mile. And some friends of mine said, this is the coolest video game ever. We went and played it a couple of times and the machine disappeared. And I actually looked it up the other day because I was wondering what it was and what the deal was with it. And I remember literally a week ago, I looked up Space Wars to find out more about it. So that's the one that I remembered being kind of very, very unusual, very, very different. And apparently it's got a cult following also. I only played it one or two times. I'm embarrassed to tell you that if I had to go back and add up the time I spent playing Defender in Bad Axe, it has to have gone up into the hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours. And that's, and somehow here I am, a successful attorney or something. So there you go. But tell you what, it's been an hour and a half. I'm starting to lose my voice. So we've had a great time. I love talking about the video games and everything else we talked about. So I'm going to sign off for now. By the way, someone just asked if I've had a Nanaimo bar. I still have not. So if somebody can hook me up or tell me where I can find them, I'll pay for them. I just want to try one, but I haven't had one yet. But I will have to sign off now. Check tomorrow's videos for what the explanation is with the Ford mystery fix. And otherwise, I'll see you again a week from today, Sunday, 1 o'clock, same time, same place. As always, talk to you later. Bye-bye.